Hello, everyone. This podcast is sponsored by Medtronic. We're broadcasting from downtown Atlanta at the Johnson STEM Activity Center, otherwise known as JSAC, where students learn to design and build robots, write code, perfect their gaming skills, and take computer classes, and, of course, have fun. My name is Sophia Huynh, today's guest podcast host. A little bit about me. I will be an incoming freshman at Columbia University this fall. I love singing karaoke and breaking into song, and speaking about my love for music, today with my amazing guest, we will be talking about something that is integral in human society, music. It has the ability to affect our feelings, allows us to connect from people across the world, and even potentially influence the world itself. Today's guest will be talking about her own interest in music, and how music can not only influence our emotions, but also be the potential cure to illnesses and influence our minds. Today's guest is an incoming freshman at Yale University. She is someone who is the co-lead of Tribe, her school's Black affinity group, helped curate the Black at Paideia Instagram page, and is a founding member of the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at her school. In her free time, she likes to play trumpet, guitar, ukulele, and also loves writing poetry and her own songs. Her favorite past STEM class is neuropsychology, and as a musician, she particularly enjoys studying the different ways how music can influence the brain. Everyone, let's welcome Phebian Gray. Hi, Phebian. Thank you for joining to us today, and welcome to the JSAC STEMCast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so to start off, what got you interested in psychology? I know you took a neuropsychology class in high school. Was that kind of your first taste of psychology, or were you interested in psychology even before you took that class?
Yes, I would say taking that class was a great way for me to have a more structured way of understanding the subject, but I think I've always been into it. My mom studied sociology in school, so I'm very used to having psych books just lying around the house, and I would like to read them as a kid. Granted, when you're in 4th grade, when you're looking at college textbooks, it's not like any that ever sticks, but I think that really sparked my interest. And as I've gotten older, I've been really into podcasts and different YouTube channels that cover the subject. And of course, when I saw the class, I had to take it. And I just think I really like how it has different applications for people, especially when you consider what different cultures they lived in. I guess it's more the sociology aspect, but it's just so interesting.
Yeah. So can you give a brief description for people who don't know? What is psychology and neuropsychology / neuroscience? And what's the difference between the two, right? They both have psychology in the name, but both of them are a little bit different, but also connected.
Yes. So psychology is a study of human behavior and emotion, and neuropsychology takes that human emotion and behavior and applies it to different parts of the brain and kind of explains why exactly, in a more, biological basis, why those things are.
Yeah, so would you say kind of neuroscience is more of a hard science, or?
Yes, but I think it's interdisciplinary, and that's kind of the strength of the subject.
Yeah, so why do you think psychology and neuropsychology are so important? So in what way does neuropsychology kind of make up and influence our day, every day, and all of our actions as well?
I think a great way to kind of answer that question is thinking about just the structure of the brain in general. I think mini crash course on brain geography. We have 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the parietal lobe. Okay, did it. In the occipital lobe, we process vision. Parietal lobe, it's visual spatial awareness, like where we and our bodies are in space. Frontal lobe is decision, concentration, personality, and temporal lobe is all other sensory experiences, more or less. Like hearing, taste, touch, all those things. And it's just interesting. I don't know, you can kind of see where all our behaviors come from in that sense, Yeah.
So what's your biggest takeaway from your own neuropsychology class? Was there any favorite moments, anything research-wise that you did that was fascinating to you?
Yes, I think for favorite moments, definitely the time that we had people come in and we did it like a coffee tasting, and we had a lecture about the coffee industry and how exploitative it could be if you don't support local brands. a more neuroscience sort of lens, it was interesting to use our olfactory senses, our noses and our mouths, to taste the coffee and guess which blends we were having, and we use our fine motor skills to cup the coffee as coffee connoisseurs do, but in a more serious way. I think what helped me kind of form a takeaway from the class was we had a reading in the brain project, and for context, at the end of the class we had to do a research project which was called Reading and the Brain. We can do literally any topic we want as long as it had to do with reading and the brain. And so I did my project kind of about bilingual children, whether that is people whose native language is not English or people who spoke more than one language at home, and what their journey was like in school, either learning English or maintaining both those languages. And I think it's interesting because there's a common belief, I think even today, that if you try and teach a child more than one language, that they're going to get confused, they're not going to retain it, it's just going to mess them up, they're not going to be able to socialize properly, and that it's just not beneficial in the long run, and that's just not true. I think it's interesting, when you're learning, it's all about neuroplasticity, and your brains are most malleable when you're children, so that's the optimal. I don't know what they're doing trying to make us take Spanish and French in high school. That's ridiculous. We should be in French and Spanish immersion schools. But it was interesting. A lot of my research kind of focused around optimal learning conditions, optimal learning environments, language learning, and also how that pertains to language in particular. And I did a lot of interviews with people my age and older people in my life who are bilingual and went to immersion schools or in English as a second language programs, or did neither of those things, just kind of had to tough it out through the system and see just about how they did socially and academically. And I think the big takeaway from that is that there's a way to kind of integrate that preservation of yourself and your culture and being able to assimilate and have an easier social experience even in a new and different environment. And I think it's especially, and I don't think the optimal environment for that is like the ESOL programs. I think maybe something to an immersion school would be a lot better. Well, that was kind of my takeaway from the project, is in terms of applying that to real life. I think it's interesting how there are a lot of things in our world that are kind of pigeonholed as being strictly societal issues that also you can use a biological, or in this case neurological, basis to kind of find solutions to that are practical and doable.
Yeah. So since we're here to talk about music, how that connects with neuropsychology, I'm really interested in how you got interested in music, and kind of what's your own story. So what got you first interested in music?
Yes, I would just say that I'm a musical person. I come from a musical family, I can't pinpoint one exact thing. My house is never quiet unless literally no one is there, because everyone's always doing something, washing the dishes with their earbuds, or vacuuming the living room with the earbuds, or like playing guitar in their room, or, which kind of sucks, blasting music throughout the house, and you can't concentrate on anything you're doing because all you hear is the bass. And I think that was, I don't know, every memory I can think of kind of has music in the background. Kids these days fight over who gets to aux in the car. When I was a kid, we fought over who gets to pick the CD we listen to in the car. And I think it's interesting now that I have a more kind of academic interest in music and like music theory and playing music in band settings. I think both my sisters do it as well. They play instruments and they sing. And it's interesting when you consider that neither of my parents do those things, or have done those things. And I think that kind of just comes from the fact that I think music is really important in their respective cultures. My mom is Ugandan, my dad is Liberian, and it was just very powerful for me to see how music brings people together in that way and kind of connects people to cultures.
Yeah, so what kind of genres of music do you really like to listen to?
That's a hard one. I know everyone says that they like all kinds of music,
Mm-hmm.
and they're lying when they say that, but I'm not lying. I am not. Because I think that comes from, again, my parents have very different music tastes. My mom was really into Afrobeats, house music, and my dad liked old school funk, that sort of stuff. And I think I like music today that kind of reminds me of those genres. I'm always on the lookout for something new and interesting that I never heard before, which I think is interesting when you consider just the act of listening to music in general. It's a very all-encompassing experience in the brain. I think for non-musicians, it's very much in the temporal lobe with just sensory in general. The auditory cortex is nestled in between the amygdala and the hippocampus, emotion and memory. And me, I don't know, I want something more improv that kind of activates all those when you have an unfamiliar experience, you're using more of your brain. I'm always in the mood for new, different, crazy music.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so like when we're talking about music and it transcends boundaries, and even I think the biggest one for a lot of people is the boundary of language, right? So for me, I listen to like a lot of different types of music as well. Mainly a lot of languages that I have no idea what they mean. So whether it be Spanish, K-pop, C-pop, J-pop, Russian, who knows? Even though I can't understand necessarily the lyrics that they have behind them, I can still feel the emotion, right? The beats, the tempo, and kind of the vibe, overall vibe that they're giving off of. And when we're talking about emotion, right, a lot of times people think it's very conceptual, right? It's not hard. You can't really grasp it. But even if we're looking in neuroscience as well, you're talking about the amygdala, right? The certain part of the brain, when you're looking at that in the hard science, it explains all of these kind of quote unquote conceptual concepts. So even if something is quote unquote wishy-washy, there's like a hard hard science behind that also explains the how and the why as well, which is really cool. Yeah, so we're combining both music and neuropsychology. How can those two be interconnected as well?
Yes, so I think like going back to like the just brain geography, you know, like as I was saying a little bit before, we process music in the auditory cortex, which is in the temporal lobe, sandwiched right in between the little amygdala with all our emotions and the hippocampus with all our memories. Music is a very all-encompassing experience in that way, I think. You know, you have emotions, you have memories. We associate music with different things. I think if you're someone who plays music as well, it can also be a very visual experience in the occipital lobe. Maybe you're someone who has experience with reading music. Maybe even when you listen to music, you can picture a score as well, which is really interesting to think about. When it comes to words and lyrics, we process language with Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe. And if you're someone who likes songwriting, you know, that's Broca's area in the frontal lobe, personality, that sort of thing. It is really what you make it for you. You know, it's a really unique individual experience depending on what that really means for you.
Yeah, so why are you so interested in connecting music and psychology together for yourself?
I think that there's so many applications that are found with like that overlap between those two seemingly different subjects. I think for me, a really big one of those things is mental health. When I was younger, I liked to watch the show called Unfabulous. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's this girl and she's in middle school and she just would have a ridiculous day, and then she would come home and jump on the bed with her guitar and she would write a song about her day. And I was like, wait, that's kind of brilliant. And now I do that. I think it's really therapeutic in that way. And so I don't know. I think for me, music is it's therapeutic in just the way of I can process the things I go through, you know, especially with songwriting and improvising music. You're using your frontal lobe and your temporal lobe, your language processing, language production, as well as music production to create that. And I think as well as just the community I found within music, sometimes what I really need is to play a song with a friend or play a song with my sister. And, you know, that helps with like, when you're stressed, you release cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And when you're having a bonding experience with someone, you're having a more pleasant experience, you have release oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And it's just really pleasant and therapeutic. And I feel like, personally, it's really helpful. And it also has applications in a more, like, in psychiatry as well. People can prescribe music therapy to help deal with certain, you know, stress, pain management, neurological disorders, mental illness. I mean, we all know the benefits of the lo-fi beats we listen to study for moving concentration. Yes. So why wouldn't it have those more cosmic applications?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit more on music therapy and the musical aspect in the medical field as well. Maybe getting a little bit more in depth about that. How else can music affect, I guess, the medical realm?
Yes. So I have 2 case studies that I wanted to share today. The first one is regarding a man who had Alzheimer's. This case is from 2001, and how he had a hard time transitioning into an assisted living facility. And for those who do not know, Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease that affects the neurons in our brains when there's too much protein growing on your neurons, it can cause plaque or tangles. And why is that important? So basically everything we experience in life is kind of, we process it through electric signals called action potentials. And the action potentials, our brain processes those by sending it along the neurons. And that process is called synaptic transmission. And if you have plaque holes, all these tangles within the neurons, they can't be connected properly. And you have a harder time sending those action potentials there. And the thing about the brain especially is it depends on neuroplasticity. It's definitely something that you can strengthen by repeated action, but it's also something you can weaken if you don't access those pathways enough. And so it's unfortunate, like if you look at a normal brain and a brain of someone with Alzheimer's, it almost looks like their brain has been decayed a little bit because those neurons have died because they have the plaque on them, they have not been used properly. So, and you can only imagine like how that affects you personally kind of deals with like what parts of the brain you're losing. A lot of people lose memory. That's kind of the big thing that everyone knows. You are more disoriented, more confused. Sometimes you even lose motor abilities. And I can imagine only how difficult that would be to kind of cope with knowing that you're suffering with that, but can't even retain memory long enough to like, it's hard. And this guy was having a really hard time transitioning to a different environment altogether. He was really aggressive. He was depressed. He didn't want to go out and be with his family when they came to visit or participate in group activities. And so what they did in this particular case study was they had him listen to music from his childhood. And it's a light and day difference. Like how we were saying earlier with the auditory cortex being next to the amygdala and the hippocampus. Even if you don't have that short-term memory of like what's happening, because of things that are deeply embedded in our memory, those neural pathways being accessed so many times, something as familiar as a song from your childhood would even light those pathways up, even if you can't recognize what that is. And over time, he became a lot happier. It had a really positive effect on his life, I think. And it's kind of hard with Alzheimer's because there's not much that people know in terms of like causes and treatments. And the most you can really do for someone is try and make their lives as comfortable as possible and make sure that they're taking care of themselves, because some people lose the ability to function in even that sense. And so I think music therapy in that sort of way was life-changing for someone like him, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you brought up that case as well, because in my personal experience, I also remember another case where this woman who also had Alzheimer's, like the case that you were just talking about, what they did for therapy is, let's say her favorite song was Hey Jude by the Beatles. And so every time they would play Hey Jude by the Beatles, she was a lot more energetic, livelier. She just had a more life look live, like in her eyes, right? And because of Alzheimer's, she only had that short-term memory, but because she loved that song so much, it was ingrained in her long-term memory in the brain, right? So it was touching on her amygdala, those emotions. For example, let's say that one of her biggest memories of with Hey Jude correlated was when she was eating dinner with her parents. So every time that Hey Jude would play, she would all of a sudden remember all the memories associated with that song. So when you're looking, I guess, scientifically, this music can stimulate parts of the brain that probably you thought you would have forgotten, and it relives all of that stuff, which is really cool.
Definitely.
Yeah, so you're talking about one study about the Alzheimer's. Are there any other cases or studies that you know on the top of your head where music has also helped in the medical field as well?
Yes, I wanted to talk about, there's another case regarding a woman with a traumatic brain injury. And for those who don't know, traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs, trying to find a way to explain this without using trauma or injury, but it's when you hurt your brain, basically. This can be caused by a hit or a jostle. You can be something sudden and vigorous that kind of causes this injury to your head. I think it'll help to give examples. I think everyone's kind of familiar with concussions if you've done a sport or been in a small accident. There's other types of traumatic brain injuries like contusions, which is like a bruise on the brain, or injuries that even involve the blood being cut off to the brain. Why would that be important? Like I was saying earlier about synaptic transmission. It's a chemical process to move the action potentials along this the neurons, and without the oxygen to help trigger the chemical reaction, which is caused by a change in the charge of the ions in your neurons. That's a fun sentence. That doesn't happen. Another kind of traumatic brain injury would be a penetrating brain injury, like if something pierced your skull and was stuck in your brain. Definitely get checked out if you have that. And what exactly can happen if you have a brain injury completely depends on the severity of it. I think maybe people have experiences with concussions where they have a headache and they're a little disoriented and they need to take a couple of days off and they're good to go. And some people definitely, if you lose consciousness, that is something to definitely be afraid of. Or of course, if you have something protruding from your skull, that would be very bad.
Definitely, yes.
This case wasn't too specific about what happened to this woman. She was in a motor vehicle accident. She was the passenger. She had severe brain injuries, and the blood flow to her brain stem was cut off. So she ended up losing a lot of her. She lost her a lot of language capabilities and motor capabilities. So she couldn't talk anymore. She couldn't move, and they thought that she would be in a vegetative state for an indefinite amount of time, which is very devastating. Eventually, she made enough progress in the original hospital that she was at, where they moved her to an intensive rehabilitation center, and it was hard. At that time, she had ability to use a letterboard, which for those who don't know, a letterboard is a board or a piece of paper with letters on it. So for someone who is nonverbal with some motor abilities, you can gesture to the different letters to spell out a word or a sentence, and that is how you can communicate. Unfortunately, the people who were working with her at this hospital did not have the patience to actually sit and talk to her, and she was really frustrated, and she felt really isolated and alone, and she would act out and have tantrums because who wouldn't do that if no one would talk to you and this was your only way of communicating in your whole life? You're able to talk and walk, and suddenly that's just been taken away from you. Eventually, they had found out that the woman really enjoyed music, and she was put in this group music therapy program, and they would listen to music, and that really changed her life. I think at first she would point out different lyrics that kind of stuck out with her. If you look kind of in the beginning of her journey, she would kind of reference music that had that longing sort of feeling, the yearning to wish that things you can go back to how they were. A song that stuck out to me from that part of the case study was Yesterday by the Beatles. Yesterday all my problems seem far away, as a line that she pointed out. And when the music therapist saw that she had this affinity for music, he eventually assigned her bibliotherapy as a way of therapy, which is writing for therapeutic purposes. And the lady began songwriting, which is interesting because you can see both in the music that she was drawn to and in the lyrics that she wrote for herself, especially as they grew with more complexity, as she was able to regain a lot of her motor abilities, was all very optimistically themed. Things are tough now, but I can keep on going was a line I remember reading a lot from that case study. And it's just interesting how even though it's not spoken language, music gives people that sort of it gives them the ability to express themselves in a way that has a positive effect on their rehabilitation. And that's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, so throughout this podcast, we've been talking about how music has been basically stimulating all sorts of different parts of the brain, right? Not just the left side or the right side, the whole part, right? The whole brain, all of these left, right, front, center, inside, outside. So I think another thing is there's another case, but this woman, she has aphasia. So for those who don't know, aphasia is kind of basically the ability where it's hard to speak, right? So certain parts of the brain are damaged where it's hard to speak verbally, to say certain sounds or to speak certain words. And that kind of damaged her left side of the brain, so the left temporal lobe. And then also what happened was through music therapy, she was actually able to sing the words of certain sounds or certain words that she had a lot of trouble speaking. And the reason is they did a lot of testing, but because music affects the whole different parts of the brain instead of just one side, it's almost like, for example, you're going on a road trip. one section's blocked. Well, then you can just take another exit and go around it right to your destination. And that's kind of how it went with her. So even though she had trouble speaking, when you're singing a song, it's activating different parts that are associated with music. So it was almost a short cutaway as well. So she was able to start speaking a lot better after that music therapy, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So we know a lot of the benefits of musical therapy. How do you think music in neuropsychology and neuroscience should be used in the future? Maybe in education or even something else beyond that as well?
Yeah, so this isn't like a very hard science medical sort of answer, but I think because we know things about how the brain does best when learning, when there's less cortisol, less stress in the environment, and music helps people focus. I wish there was just more application for music in classrooms. I think I really valued my classroom experiences with music, whether that was, learning, having a song to remember what the mitochondria was, or having a teacher that would let you put in earbuds while it was silent reading time, or being able to listen to the music of a place we were studying during history class. I think, one, that helps people. Because music is so connected to memory, a lot of students perform better under circumstances like that. And then also just more in a global sense, I think music connects people. And I think being able to include music, especially in the study of other cultures and different kinds of people, will help more in building empathy in that sort of way. And being able to see yourself in things that are different from you.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of experiences when learning. So, for example, you brought up the song to learn the mitochondria, 5th grade, the cell rap. If you don't know what it is, you should check it out. But basically, it's a song tells you all about the cell. So cells, they're made of organelles. Try to catch a fast one of cytoplasm gels.
Definitely.
Could go on and on. And then also, I think another one that sticks out to me is the 50 States song, right? There's no complexity to the lyrics. It's basically just all 50 states in alphabetical order, but with a nice tune to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even that, it helps you remember all of the names of the states in alphabetical order, which is really handy. So handy. But yeah, definitely. So for our last question, for people interested in music and in STEM, what careers could they probably pursue in the future as well?
Yes. Well, we definitely covered music therapy, and there's 1,000,007 different applications to that.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what I think something that wasn't necessary. Well, you kind of talked about it with the lady who had aphasia.
Yeah.
The implications for music as it relates to language, and not just being able to speak, but even like learning other languages. I think that's a really interesting path to go down. I also feel like music is very inherently mathematical. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All the people I know who are music theory wizards are also math wizards. And, music is sound waves. I think that has really interesting implications for like instruments and how they have different sounds, and just the study of sound in general if you're a very physics-oriented person. And of course, we have things like, especially with new genres of music that are predominant, that came up with synthesizers and computers. We have sound engineering, music production, music design. These things are all very important. And if you have an affinity for technology, I think you can do that as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of technology and math integrated as well. Like you're talking about physics, like even if you're playing instruments, right? There's the whole physics of how that instrument is built, how that instrument produces sound and sound waves.
Why you should always tune your instrument.
Yes, definitely as well. And then also technology. So being able to capture that sound, right? Recording the music, using these microphones, right? All of these, and then afterwards getting that sound, being able to edit it technologically. We're talking about like EDM as well, dubstep, even all of those stuff. A lot of it's technologically based by taking an original sound and changing it and mixing it so it sounds like something completely different. Yeah, well, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Phebian. And thank you guys for watching. So without listeners like you, this podcast obviously is not possible. But to learn more about JSAC, see previous episodes, and to stay tuned with continuous new episodes, definitely visit the website www.johnsonstem.org. And thank you so much, and goodbye.